Hi, it's Tuesday, October 21st, and we're tracking Tropical Storm Melissa in the Central Caribbean this afternoon. The system has been tracked for the past several days, was formerly Invest 98L as a tropical wave when it was coming into the Caribbean, but now the Hurricane Center has deemed it has enough classification, or organization rather, to classify this as a tropical storm. And the system has been pretty disorganized for the past several days. It's still dealing with some pretty significant vertical shear in that we have some pretty strong trade winds across this part of the Caribbean, which is natural for this part of the world any time of year. And you can really see it here if you look at the Lesser Antilles. All these low-level clouds are moving pretty briskly off to the west. And if you look at the Western Caribbean, we've got some upper-level cirrus clouds which are pushing out of the west. And so that's polar opposites of each other. And so at the surface, you've got winds going to the west, upper part of the troposphere going to the east, and so that's a very strong vertical shear and has left the system fairly tilted for the past several days. And what I mean by tilted is that if you look across this view, we've got the surface center here, so the surface area of low pressure is here in advance of all the showers and thunderstorms. And within these showers and thunderstorms, we've got a mid-level low pressure system. You might be able to pick out some counterclockwise rotation within all of this convection. And so these two centers are tilted pretty significantly with height. So as you go higher in altitude, the center of the low pressure is not stacked. It's separated with distance. And so this is not a very healthy look for a tropical storm. And the good news is for the short term, this will likely not lead to much in the way of quick intensification because this tilted structure just does not allow for that. It more so just allows for more steady or gradual intensification as long as this kind of structure persists. And that kind of leads me into the intensity forecast of this, as for the next 5 days, it does seem like the easiest part of this forecast. And beyond that, it may get a little bit more difficult, but we're just talking about 5 days for now. If we look at the GFS low-level flows, this is the 850 millibars, so near the surface, we can see that over the next few days, the trade winds that have been pretty strong, they do slow down once the system gets further west. In fact, you can see that right now. If you look across this part of the Western Caribbean, the trade winds are not nearly as fast as they are here in the Lesser Antilles. So that will slow down the forward motion of the system, will decrease the magnitude of the vertical shear a little bit. Now, there will likely still be some, because if we look at the upper level part of the atmosphere, you can see that we do have this trough digging in over the southeast US and over Cuba, and this will likely promote some westerly flow aloft and may still shear the system out of the west. Though we could still see the system steadily intensify because we do have plentiful divergence, so air spreading away at the top of the troposphere north of the Caribbean. And this may facilitate thunderstorm formation over the system center. That may allow the system to still intensify at a gradual pace. And a lot of models right now expect the system to struggle to intensify much for the next couple of days and then intensify more at a steady pace into a hurricane by the end of the 5-day forecast. Now, there's a caveat to that, and that is the GFS. The GFS is going a little bit stronger with this, and that's where I lead into the track forecast of this, as intensity is very dependent, or it dictates, that's what I'm looking for. The intensity that we achieve in the short term heavily dictates where the system is going to track in the future. So again, looking at this upper level plot, we can see this upper trough is digging in again over Cuba. And one aspect of tropical cyclones is that as they get stronger, you get thunderstorms towering taller into the atmosphere. So a tropical storm, for example, is not going to have as much altitude. It's not going to tower as high into the atmosphere as a strong hurricane would. And that's the primary uncertainty that we've seen in model guidance. The GFS is one of the outliers that has the system getting attacked together very fast and intensifying into a hurricane as soon as tomorrow night or early on Thursday. And you see it here on the model that this is actually getting very close to a hurricane, if not hurricane already, by this point. And because of that, the system is taller with height. And so if we look at this map again, this trough with all the southwesterly flow, with a stronger storm that is taller, it's going to feel the force of this trough more. So it's going to begin to recurve in a quicker fashion, like we're seeing on the GFS. And for that reason, the GFS comes north of the land of Hispaniola and north of the Caribbean on its forecast. And that's track scenario number 1. The other track scenario is where the system does not get as strong, like the European model. This has been a lot more weak, on its solutions on exactly how this is going to play out. And because it's not as strong, it's not towering as high into the atmosphere. So the feel what it feels of the flow from this trough is not as strong on the European model compared to the GFS. And for that reason, it doesn't quickly recurve out to sea, and more so, this trough just misses it because eventually this trough does pull out into the Caribbean or into the Western Atlantic, and it just leaves the storm behind. And this is a scenario now where the system is just kind of stuck in the Caribbean, especially because if you look at the mid-troposphere flow, which is right here, you'll see that we have competing steering flows. So again, the surface flow has calmed down by this point. We don't have strong easterly trades anymore trying to force the system west. But if we look at the upper lower parts of the atmosphere, we've got one ridge in the mid-troposphere in the eastern Caribbean, central Atlantic. This is trying to pull it north of the Caribbean into Hispaniola. We've got this other one that's sitting over the Gulf of Mexico, extending into Cuba. This is trying to push it south into South America. And these two flows from these ridges are competing, and a lot of those forces are canceling each other out. So the net effect is that the system just does not move all too much, and so we just get the system to stall here. Now, as time goes on, once we get past the time when that trough lifts out, then that will fully clear up which of these two scenarios is going to occur. Because by that point, as that trough lifts out, we begin to see this ridge to the west build into the Bahamas. You'll see it here on the European, that by Friday morning, this is by the point that trough is lifted out into the Western Atlantic, and now this ridge is building into the east, over Florida and over the Bahamas. And by this point, it begins to trap Melissa down into the Central Caribbean. And that persists for the next several days. As you can see, this ridge is also still here. So it just stalls here on this model for the next 6 days on its forecast. And so that's really what we have to figure out for the next few days. Are we going to quickly go north of the Caribbean and maybe go to sea fairly quickly? Or are we just going to sit in the Caribbean for a long time? And truthfully, if it does take that latter solution, Melissa could be around for a very long time, extending through the end of the month and into November. And this is very bad news for the Greater Antilles. And this is why I start talking about the impacts of the system. Because, I talked about intensity. The good news is we're not looking at the system, in all likelihood, for the next 5 days, rapidly intensifying into a major hurricane. That does not seem like the very likely scenario because of this trough imparting this westerly shear continuously for the next few days. However, I must remind you that we don't need a strong hurricane at all to cause very significant impacts to land areas, especially in an area like Hispaniola with the high terrain here. The downside of this trough is that it's pushing, with all this westerly shear, all of the showers and thunderstorms that's forming over the system are being pushed onto the eastern side. And you can see this very clearly if we look at the European model relative humidity plot. So the green here is showing you all the moisture. And you can see the western side pretty dry. And in this scenario, we don't actually get too much rainfall in Jamaica or Cuba because the western side is so dry from that westerly shear. But on the flip side of that, look at Hispaniola, all in green here. And this persists. Reminder, the storm sits here on this model for 6 days, dumping rainfall for a very extended period of time. And this is the rainfall forecast from the European model. And I think this is a little bit underdone, but you can see the potential here. The red there, I'm not sure of the millimeter, inch to millimeter classifications here or conversions. That's what I'm looking for. But this is a lot of rainfall falling in southern Hispaniola. We'll look at a map in just a moment of the potential rainfall in millimeters from the hurricane center. But I'd argue that this could even go further inland. This is a really good example from the hurricane model, the HMON, which shows you a more high resolution look at this. And you can see these strong bands of thunderstorms pushing not just to the south coast, but even further inland into Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And that will likely spread more heavy rainfall into central and northern parts of Hispaniola, more so than what the European is showing. Now, part of this does have to do with exactly how far north or south the system gets. There does seem to be a little bit of model disagreement there as well as to where exactly it ends up stalling. For example, the European model has it stalling again very close to Haiti and Jamaica, so that would lead a lot more rainfall across the landmass. But if we look at the HAPS model, which I can pull up here, this stalls it pretty far south. And this would be a scenario where we don't actually get all too much rainfall falling in Hispaniola. Still get, potentially flooding issues, but a lot of the heavy rainfall stays south of you all. And then beyond that point, the system begins to track southwest, and that's a long-term thing. We're not going to talk about that, at least for now. uh, in this video. But you can see a lot of the uncertainty that we have here. And in the next 5 days, even the ellipse for uncertainty, I would say spreads across an area like this. And this is a key message that we don't know where the system is going to go. We don't know exactly how the system is going to intensify. So many variables are here that could change the future of Melissa. But the key message that we do know is that we're likely to see very heavy rainfall, especially across Hispaniola, for the next few days. And that's really what the Hurricane Center is stressing here in their forecast. And going to their forecast now, you can see their current hurricane forecast cone right now. And you can see we do have a hurricane watch in place for southern Haiti, tropical storm watch for Jamaica, as we could have the system again steadily intensifying for the next few days into a hurricane by this weekend. And you can see the uncertainty cone. We could see the system track, maybe a little east here like the GFS, getting closer to Hispaniola, but we could also see the system deviate a little bit further west, getting closer to Jamaica or Cuba. So we could be seeing impacts across all of these islands for the next several days. And the wind risk will be significant because of all the rainfall we get. This is a rainfall forecast that we have here. You can see on this general forecast, a wide swath of 100 to 200 millimeters of rainfall in the Dominican Republic and Haiti, with some areas exceeding that, going towards 300 millimeters. And especially with the high terrain here, it's like, I've used this analogy so many times, but it's like you have a wet sponge and you squeeze out the sponge, so all the water inside it comes out. So all the high terrain in Hispaniola can really do that to the atmosphere and take out all of the moisture that it has, and can really dump a ton of rainfall in a very short period of time. And so that will likely lead to, unfortunately, a lot of flooding issues and mudslides across this area. But I mentioned that wind is also a big issue here, because as you get all of this rain, it saturates all the soil, so you get weaker soil for trees, other things that may be implanted into the ground. And so when hurricane force winds potentially come in, that can cause even more damage because the ground is now weaker from all of the rainfall that we're getting. So unfortunately, a prolonged and potentially significant impact is likely here in Hispaniola, and we could even see impacts extending to Jamaica and Cuba. So that may extend beyond 5 days. We'll have to see exactly how the system goes in the next few days, but all of these areas should be under high alert that will likely see very significant impacts occur here. That's all that I've got for today. I will continue to have more videos on the system as it progresses towards the northwest. Make sure you're preparing in all of the islands that I just mentioned. And that's all for now. Thanks for watching.